চরণ বন্দন জয় জয় জগন্নাথ সচিরানন্দন ত্রিভুবনে করে যার চরণ বন্দন জয় জয় জগন্নাথ সচিরানন্দন নীলাচলে শঙ্খ চক্র গদা পদ্মদার নীলাচলে আর নীলাচলে শঙ্খ চক্র গদা পদ্মদার লীলা আর নদিয়ানা গরে দণ্ড কমণ্ডল কর নদিয়ানা গরে দণ্ড আর জয় জয় জগন্নাথ সচিরানন্দন ত্রিভুবনে করে যার চরণ বন্দন জয় জয় জগন্নাথ কেহ বলে পুরবেতে রাবণ বদিলা কেহ বলে গোলকের বৈভব লীলা প্রকাশ করেলা গোলকের বৈভব লীলা প্রকাশ শ্রী রাধার ভাবে গৌরায় অবতার শ্রী রাধার আর শ্রী রাধার ভাবে গৌরায় অবতার শ্রী রাধার হরে কৃষ্ণ নাম গৌরা করিলা প্রচার হরে কৃষ্ণ হরে কৃষ্ণ নাম গৌরা করিলা প্রচার হরে কৃষ্ণ নাম গৌরা বাসুদেব ঘোষ বলে করি জোরায়াত বাসুদেব বাসুদেব ঘোষ বলে করে জোড়ায়াত জয় গৌর সেই কৃষ্ণ সেই জগন্নাথ জয় আর জয় গৌর সেই কৃষ্ণ সেই জগন্নাথ জয় গৌর সেই কৃষ্ণ সেই আর জয় জয় জগন্নাথ সচিরানন্দন ত্রিভুবনে করে যার চরণ বন্দন জয় 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 জগন্নাথ বলদেব সুভদ্রা মহারানী সুদর্শন জগন্নাথ জয় বলদেব সুভদ্রা মহারানী জয় গৌরনিতায় কৃষ্ণ বলরাম ললিতা বিশাখা জয় রাধে শ্যাম গৌরনিতায় কৃষ্ণ বলরাম জয় জয় প্রভুপাদ 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 জয় প্রভুপাদ পাদ প্রভুপাদ প্রভুপাদ
अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जाय। नामचारी श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जाय। प्रेम से को श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरि गौर भक्त वृंद की जाय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंद राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जाय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जाय। मायापुर धाम की जाय। जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की जाय। तुलसी महारानी की जाय। भक्ति देवी की जाय। सामवेद भक्त वृंद की जाय। All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing with the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, written by the disciple of Srila Prabhupada, His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. The chapter entitled College, Marriage, and Gandhi's Movement. In 1920, Abai completed his 4th year of college and took the BA exam. Afterwards, with the ordeal of final examinations behind him, he took a short vacation. To fulfill a long-cherished desire, he traveled alone, a day's journey by train, to Jagannath Puri. Srila Prabhupada remembers. Every day of my boyhood, I used to think how to go to Jagannath Puri and how to go to Vrindavan. At that time, the fare was for Vrindavan 4 or 5 rupees, and similarly for Jagannath Puri. So I was thinking, when shall I go? I took the first opportunity to go to Jagannath Puri. So this was a junction point in Srila Prabhupada's life. He had married 2 years before that, when he was 21 years old. He wasn't living with his wife. He was still living with his father, his brothers and sisters, whoever was there still in the family. And after such a long span, beginning his education at age 5, now he was practically 24 years old, complete. He had taken his BA, that's Bachelor's of Arts, final examination at the Scottish churches, and he was free from his studies at last, after so many years. So just all of us have experienced when we finish our exams, we need a break. So this is the first time in Prabhupada's life that he broke the chains and left and went somewhere alone without his family members, not thinking of his wife, not even thinking of his father. Since his childhood, he was 4 years old when he began the Rath Yatra. When he was a little child, even then, he was so dedicated to Lord Jagannath. And where did this devotion come from? Well, we have to remember that Srila Prabhupada was born into a pure Gaudiya Vaishnava family. The lineage is from Udarandas Thakur, who was one of the Sakas who came with Nityananda Prabhu. And Srila Prabhupada, he entered into that same rasa of friendship with the Supreme Lord through that lineage. His father trained him to be a pure Gaudiya Vaishnava, and he had that training instilled in him. So just as Mahaprabhu was so attached to Lord Jagannath, he lived there at the request of his mother. He left it up to his mother. Should I go to Vrindavan? Should I go to Jagannath Puri? And his mother, Sachi Devi, she said, you please live at Jagannath Puri. Then I can get word of you. The devotees can come. It's not so far. It's 470 kilometers from Calcutta. It takes 1 week, 2 weeks, depending upon how long it takes you to walk. Or it's just a day's journey by train. The British by that time had put the train tracks all over India, connecting the villages and the cities. So Prabhupada cost 4 or 5 rupees. He went to Jagannath Puri all alone. And there, he walked along the same broad street where for thousands of years the Rath Yatra procession had passed. In the market, shops displayed small carved and painted wooden murtis of Lord Jagannath. Although it was not Rath Yatra season, tourists were purchasing souvenirs, and in the temple they purchased Jagannath Prasadam. In the Jagannath temple, 56 gigantic offerings of cooked rice and vegetables were presented daily in worship before the deities of Jagannath, Balaram, and Subhadra. Now, the worship of Jagannath is not like any other worship in any other temple, in any other sampradaya in the entire creation. They have their own method of worship, and we've heard from previous weeks that Srila Prabhupada had by this time become very much influenced by the teachings of Gandhiji. Now Gandhiji, let us do a little bit of comparison between their two lives and why Prabhupada was so attracted to his teachings. All of us know that in our college age, it's even by the psychologists and the scientists, they say from the age of 18 to the age of 22, you have to give that age group some freedom, because that's when they're exploring different ideologies in life. So Srila Prabhupada also in his college years, he was hearing from the different types of nationalists, the activists, the ones who wanted to fight, such as Subhash Chandra Bose, who was just a year ahead of him, the moderates, who appreciated the British rule but still wanted independence, and the Satyagraha, Gandhiji, and his followers, who were following supposedly the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, and were applying that somehow or other to these Swarajya and Swadeshi movement. So Srila Prabhupada, at this point in his life, was most attracted to Gandhiji's teachings. Now Gandhi, he was also born into a Vaishnava family in Gujarat. But his family, just as we heard in Prabhupada's childhood, Prabhupada's mother, Rajani, she wanted him to go to England and become a barrister. A barrister means an advocate, a vakil. And we also heard that in order to get any government job, you had to take the Indian Civil Service test. In England, anyone who wanted a good job, occupation with high salary, they had to go to England, get indoctrinated there, take the tests. If they passed, then they would come back and get a good government job. So this was the path that Gandhiji's family put him on. At the age of 18, he went to England to take that test. And he said that he felt like, because we all know this analogy, he felt like a frog in a well who had just come out of the well and seen the ocean. He was completely lost in England. And because of his British schooling, he had never studied any of the portions of the Vedas. He didn't know Sanskrit, he knew English, he knew Gujarati, which was his family tongue. The only thing he had ever read was the Manu Samhita, because he was practicing to be a lawyer, an advocate. When he got to England, and this is the most amazing thing, because this is exactly how Prabhupada was able to bring so many Indians to Krishna consciousness. When he got to England, he couldn't find anyone who was vegetarian, and he was starving. He didn't know the language well enough, and finally, wandering around in London, he found one vegetarian restaurant, and they had a society, London Vegetarian Society. And he became a member of that society, and they were all studying Bhagavad Gita. And by that society, he began to study Bhagavad Gita, he learned Sanskrit, he began to translate Bhagavad Gita into Gujarati, and he became attached to the Bhagavad Gita. This, now coming in contact with Bhagavad Gita and Sri Krishna, he took those teachings and molded them in such a way to create his national political party. Now, how was he able to do that? He took all the verses that we memorize, 2.62 and 63, from lust, anger arises, from all, and then he took the 12th chapter, which is all about devotional service, that of all the different types of yoga, devotion is the topmost. He took all of that and applied that to his nationalism, to the Swaraj movement. So Srila Prabhupada, having the Vaishnava training, he was very attracted to Gandhi because he always saw him carrying a Bhagavad Gita. And he would be quoting Bhagavad Gita slokas. But he would use those slokas for Swaraj. So now Prabhupada has come here, and the train going from Calcutta to Puri, you see, there were businessmen in both places, and they decided that if they would advertise Puri to be a big health resort, then both can make a lot of money. So it was the Bengalis' habit at that time. They would all go, whenever they had vacations, they would go to Puri. They still do this. They go to Puri, they swim in the ocean, they relax, and they come back very healthy to Calcutta and get sick again. So already the route was there. And many Bengalis would come and go. They would buy the souvenirs, they would buy the Jagannath Prasadam. Abai entered the temple and saw the deities. On a side altar stood the Murti of Lord Chaitanya in his sixth-armed form, manifesting himself simultaneously as Krishna, Ram, and the sannyasi Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was famous in Puri, where he had spent the last 18 years of his life, conducting Hare Krishna Kirtan with his followers and dancing ecstatically at the yearly Ratha Yatra as the carts were wheeled along the main road, surrounded by thousands of devotees. Lord Chaitanya had danced and swooned in ecstasy of his intense love and separation from Lord Krishna. Now this Srila Prabhupada was familiar with because this was his Gaudiya Vaishnav training. He knew about Lord Chaitanya. When he entered the temple, this was all explained to me by Yadavpati Prabhu, because he visited many times. I asked him to make diagrams of how Prabhupada must have entered the temple and what he saw. So you enter from the eastern gate. That's where Patita Pavana is. For those of us who can't enter, we can take darshan outside of Patita Pavana, most merciful. For those of you who are so fortunate to have taken birth in India, in Hindu families, you can go in, and there are different sections. First you come to the Bhog Mandap, and that's where the rice, dal, chapati is all offered in a big room. Then you go to the Nata Mandap, and that's where the Gururu Stamba is, that Lord Chaitanya used to stand behind to take darshan. And then you go into the Griha Garbha, where Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, and Sudarshan, you can take darshan. And you have Bhudevi and Sri Devi on either side. You have Nilamadava. So Srila Prabhupada was taking darshan, and on the south side is the biggest kitchen in the whole world. There are 1,000 servants there, the cooks and the assistants. And they cook up to 56 preparations every day for Lord Jagannath. Every day they cook enough for at least 5,000 people. And on holidays, they'll cook up to for 10 million pilgrims. That's imagine cooking for 10 million people. Today, Prabhuji on a holiday, he cooked for 2,000 people. And every day we cook khichdi, up to 8,000 people. 10 million people, that's the capacity of the Jagannath kitchen. And next to the kitchen is the temple of Satbhuj that Srila Prabhupada took darshan of. Now this Satbhuj temple was established by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. We can read in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that when Lord Chaitanya mercifully gave him darshan, he gave him darshan of this Satbhuj Murti. 2 arms of Mahaprabhu holding the Kamandalu and the Danda, 2 arms of Krishna with the flute, and 2 arms of Ramachandra with his bow and arrows. So Mahaprabhu, in that form, was established as he was about a 4 foot high, very big Murti, by Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, because he was the head priest of the Jagannath Puri temple at that time. So Srila Prabhupada took darshan, Satbhuj Murti, Jagannath Ji, and then you come around, and on the northeast side is Ananda Bazar. Ananda Bazar is where you can buy all the Mahaprasadam, all the different types. Now they offer 2 different types of prasad to Jagannath. In the Bhog Mandap, they have a system where the pujari, he puts water in the palm of his hand, and if they see Jagannath from behind in the water, all the boga of the rice, dal, sabji, that's all offered in the Bhog Mandap, huge quantities. In the inner sanctum, where the deity is of Lord Jagannath, they offer the special things that Mother Yasoda used to cook for Krishna. The milk sweets, the makan misri, all of those things that a mother would cook. So 2 different types. But at Anand Bazar, you can buy anything and everything. And that's where we all get the Mahaprasadam from. So Srila Prabhupada, he was visiting for the first time what he had been dreaming of since his childhood, finally coming to see Lord Jagannath. And the most wonderful thing about, I'm sure all of you have been to Jagannath Puri, yes? When you close your eyes at Jagannath Puri, you can still see Lord Jagannath. Anytime you're sleeping, waking, Jagannath is everywhere in Jagannath Puri. So it's his dham. So Passing over the parade route, Abai recalled his own childhood pastimes, singing and dancing in the street, the miniature cart, the procession, Jagannath smiling, his father and mother, Radha Govinda. Somehow, the fame of Lord Jagannath had inspired him as a child, and it had remained within him all these years. When shall I go to Jagannath Puri? His childhood dreaming of Puri and Vrindavan, and his compulsively studying the train tables, scheming since the age of 5 to travel here, were based on more than just a desire to tour Puri's marketplace. And he was not satisfied by once seeing the deity in the noisy, crowded temple. He had been impelled to come to Puri as a pilgrim, and his motive was his devotion to Krishna. So we understand Srila Prabhupada, out of love for Lord Jagannath and Lord Chaitanya, he came for darshan. And because this was a turning point in his life, this is a time for him to contemplate what steps was he going to take now in his life. He hadn't yet met his spiritual master. Now that he had graduated, he was going to take his wife and live with his wife. He was going to start his real grihastha life. And because he was influenced by Gandhi, it so happened, because this is the only explanation when Prabhupada talks about how he came to Puri. But Gandhi came there just a few months after Prabhupada was there. And he gives a very detailed description of what was going through his mind, because he didn't come there as a devout pilgrim, as Prabhupada did. He came there on his route of spreading Swaraj all over the country. He only visited Orissa once. He had gone to Sakshi Gopal to see a school there for Dalits. And then he came to Puri. Now, even when Gandhi was in South Africa, he used to use Lord Jagannath as an example of perfect nationalism. He said that he told, because so many Indians lived in Africa, South Africa, he told the Indians there, you see the example of Lord Jagannath. He sees no discrimination, not caste, not family, not class. Everyone is a devotee of Lord Jagannath, and all the different classes serve Lord Jagannath. Because we know that even the pig herders, they take part in Jagannath's service. Everyone. So Lord Jagannath, he sees all Indians as equal, and he accepts them all. So he would encourage people in that way, that just as Jagannath sees all Indians as one family, that's how we should see each other. This non-discrimination amongst the different classes and castes. So he was preaching like this about Lord Jagannath. But then when he got to Jagannath Puri, he saw that the Dalits were still not allowed to enter the temple, although some were allowed to serve in the temple. So this made him very unhappy. Not only at that time, and even when Prabhupada visited, we had heard about all the famines that were going on in India. So this was the time of the Odia famine. And Gandhi was taken to where all the people were starving to death. He said that he wrote in his diary they were just like skeletons with no flesh on their body. And at that time, he said, what is the use of Swaraj? If people are dying of starvation, what difference does it make who's ruling? You have to give them something to eat. So then, at that time, he had that realization. Because he said in the other parts of India, yes, they're starving because the British forced them to grow indigo, to grow cotton, to take their livelihood away. Therefore, they had no food. But here in Orissa, no one's forcing them to grow anything. It is the strong nature, the cruel nature, because sometimes there's drought and sometimes there's so much rain that all the crops and all the houses are just washed away. So he was seeing the fury of God here, of Jagannath, and how the people were suffering so much. Orissa is considered to be the poorest state in the province in all of India. Then, the next problem that he saw, because later we'll see that Prabhupada also saw inebrieties in Jagannath Puri. He said the servants, the priests, he called them a terror because they would fall upon the people to get donations from them. And he said, just like the servants, so that's how the master must be. So he was criticizing Jagannath that how can the servants be like this? But then he disclosed his real mentality. He said, no, we can't blame it on Jagannath because God is a formless nothing. He saw God as impersonal. And he gives the rules of karma and leaves it to us then. So what can Lord Jagannath do? So in that way, he disclosed himself as being an impersonalist, a Mayavadi. So therefore, he was seeing Bhagavad Gita, and he disclosed this later, he didn't see Bhagavad Gita as Krishna and Arjuna speaking. He saw it as an allegory, as a story of each person, how we have to deal with dharma and adharma within our own heart. So Gandhi took the teachings of Krishna, though Prabhupada could understand through Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy, the real philosophy, who Lord Jagannath is, who Krishna is, but Gandhi, being an impersonalist, took these teachings and applied them to his nationalistic movement. Now nationalism was strongly influencing his life, Prabhupada's life. And he had recently married and was facing the decisions of graduation and career. Yet here he was, hardly more than a boy, walking alone in Puri, where Lord Chaitanya had lived and where Lord Krishna as Jagannath still resided. Abai relished his break from the pressure of duties in Calcutta. He didn't know how the love he felt for Krishna and Krishna's pilgrimage place would fit into his life. He knew that Krishna was more important than anything else. He was God, the supreme controller, and everyone's inner guide. But there was so much token, superficial service to God. Even the nationalist speakers, although they carried the Gita on their person, were more intent on nationalism than on Krishna. Only those who were sincere devotees knew the importance and attraction of Krishna, people like his father. So here he was getting realization that yes, externally, he supported the nationalist movement at this time in his life. He was very sympathetic that we should have our own nation. But coming as a humble servant before Lord Jagannath, now at this turning point in his life, he wondered, how was he going to express this devotion that he had in his upcoming life, in his career, in his marriage? So this was a very important turning point in Prabhupada's life. 1920. He was married in 1918. An odd incident occurred at Puri. Gaur Mahan had given Abai a letter of introduction to an acquaintance who lived in Jagannath Puri. Abai went to see him and was well received. When the man was offering him lunch, however, Abai noticed a small lump within one of the cooking pots. He questioned his host, who replied, "Oh, it is meat." Abai was unable to restrain his shock. "No, what is this? I have never taken meat." Abai looked at his host in astonishment. "I never expected this at Jagannath Puri." Ashamed, his host said, "I did not know. I thought this was the best. Abai pacified the man, but he put his food aside and took no more meals there. After that, Abai ate only the Jagannath Prasadam from the temple. So this is the first, in English it's called anomaly. We think something is one way, but it turns out to be another way. We think that something is very pure, but then we start to see the impurities. So he had come to Jagannath Puri thinking that he was coming on yatra for purification. Everyone would be a great pure devotee in Jagannath Puri. And the very person who Gormahan Dey had sent him to was serving him meat. So this was a big shock to him. So then he realized he can't eat outside anymore. He only took Jagannath Prasadam after that. Abai stayed in Puri for 3 or 4 days, wandering around the holy places and visiting the famous Puri seaside with its sparkling beach and strongly pounding surf. Several times he recognized some of the priests from the Jagannath temple as they smoked cigarettes. And he heard of other unsavory activities of the sadhus connected with the temple. What kind of sadhus were these who ate fish with their Jagannath Prasadam and smoked? In this respect, he found Jagannath Puri disappointing. Now, how did this come about? We know that many times in history, even Jagannath Puri was conquered by the Mughals, by the Marathas, and now the British had come in the early 1800s. And because the priests had already been under subjugation, one temple had been destroyed, it was rebuilt a few hundred years earlier. The priests in the temple decided, before anyone is killed in war, we will just surrender to the British. We will turn over the temple, we will turn over all of Jagannath Puri to the British. The British were very happy with that, and they promised that they would not interfere with anything going on in the temple. In fact, they would make a pilgrim tax that all the pilgrims would have to pay. They would give salaries. There were 20,000 servants in the Jagannath temple. They would give salaries to everyone from this pilgrimage tax. And whenever there were big processions like Rath Yatra, the British soldiers would protect everyone on each side. But the Christian missionaries came. And when the Christian missionaries saw that the British soldiers were protecting these savage religions, one Christian missionary, he attended Rath Yatra. And he saw that one of the devotees, he did full dandavats in front of the Rath, and the Rath ran right over him and killed him. And the missionary, he was shocked, and he saw other people doing it also. And he wrote a whole book called Juggernaut. And what this Christian missionary wrote was the only thing that English-speaking people ever heard about Jagannath Puri. That these savage people, they would kill themselves in front of the carts, and this word juggernaut came to mean an irrepressible, that means you can't overcome it, a force that cannot be overcome, a violence, and this is how they saw juggernaut. So then the Christian missionaries, they complained back in England that why is our government protecting this temple? These are savages. These are heathens. These are non-Christians. They have nothing to do with our Christianity. Why are we protecting them? So then the British changed their mind and they became secular. And this is when secularism came into India. The British said, we will have nothing to do with the temple. You take care of the temple yourself. Well, you know what happens then. Then the priests take over, and all of the stealing and the cheating And at that time there were Daivi dasis. They started temple prostitution. Horrible things were going on there at Jagannath Puri. And Prabhupada was just seeing a little tip of it. He was only there for 3 or 4 days. But so many unsavory things were going on there at the Jagannath temple because there was no government control. And that was when the British forced that they have a deputy magistrate. And that was when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was sent in the 1870s. Of course, this is 50 years before Prabhupada came there. And then Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because he was so famous as being honest and a just person, he was able to clean up the whole temple at that time. He was able to kick out and imprison Bishan Kishan, who was pretending to be an incarnation of God, who said that he was going to kill all the British and he was going to kill the King of England, and that he wouldn't go to see Lord Jagannath because he was Jagannath himself, the Supreme Lord. He was a big demon. Bhaktivinoda Thakur would preach to him that, yes, this is the same way Ravana, Shishupal, Dantavakra, they all spoke like that too. And you see what happened to them, Pondraka. So this is going to happen to you now. And then he arrested them. So at the same time, the topmost purity of the worship of Lord Jagannath, the impurities were there like a shadow. And Prabhupada, unfortunately, he saw some of this during his trip. When Abai returned home, he found his young wife crying. Then he heard how her friends had told her, "Your husband is not coming back." He told her not to worry. There was no truth in the story. He had only gone for a few days and was now back. Because before the trains, when the people used to go for pilgrimage to Puri or to Vrindavan, they would make their will because they had to walk. Even when they went to Navadvip, it was walking, they had to walk there. So they would make their will in case they were killed along the way or they died along the way. So she was very young at the time, she was only 14 years old. So she was thinking, my husband, that everyone was telling her, he's not going to come back, he's gone to Puri. Although his marriage had only recently begun, Abai was dissatisfied. Radharani Datta was an attractive young girl, but Abai had never really liked her. He was thinking maybe a different wife would be better, a second wife besides this one. In India, it was socially acceptable to marry a second wife, so Abai decided to take the matter into his own hands. He made arrangements to approach the parents of another girl. But when his father heard about it, he called Abai and said, "My dear boy, you are eager to take a second wife, but I would advise you not to. It is Krishna's grace that your present wife is not to your liking. Take it as a great fortune. If you do not become too attached to your wife and family, that will help you in your future advancement in spiritual life." Abai accepted his father's advice. He wanted to obey his father, and he appreciated the saintly viewpoint. But he remained thoughtful, a bit awed by his father's forethought. And he wondered how one day in the future he would be advancing in spiritual life and be grateful that his father had done this. Your future advancement in spiritual life, this is what his father said. Abai liked the idea. He reconciled himself to the wife he had been given. This is a great step because normally when one marries, they have all types of dreams about the happiness they're going to experience. But if you marry someone that you don't like, then where's the happiness going to be? So Prabhupada was, when Pishima told me once, she was telling me that Prabhupada wanted to take a second marriage and he was making the arrangement. But then on the good advice of his father, he decided not to take that step. Although if he were not religious and he didn't respect his father, he would have done it. But Srila Prabhupada, having that good training and having the utmost love and respect for his father, he followed his advice, even though he wasn't happy with his wife. Even later, I don't think it comes in the Lilamrita. Prabhupada tried everything to make his wife a devotee. He even got her initiated. We know there are two types of initiation. There's Harinam and there's Diksha. So Harinam, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his disciples from Germany, from London, he would give them Harinam. He wouldn't give them Diksha. That's the Gayatri mantra. So meaning anyone could take Harinam. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, when he left the planet, Prabhupada arranged even for his wife to take Diksha from his godbrother Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. But she wasn't serious. She just didn't take it seriously. So as much as he tried with his family, in fact, he wouldn't even install deities in his home. His little Radha Govinda deities he gave to his sister because she was initiated, also by Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. She took Diksha from him, Harinam from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. She took care of Radha Govinda very nicely. But Prabhupada didn't have faith that his wife would take care. So he only worshipped pictures of Radha and Krishna and Panchatattva and his spiritual master. But he did it very religiously. So this was the big blessing that Srila Prabhupada had, that he wasn't attached to his wife. And therefore, when the time came, he was able to walk away. Abhay Charande's name was included on the posted list of students who had passed the BA exams and who were invited to appear for their diploma. But Abhay had decided he didn't want a diploma from Scottish Church's college. Although as a graduate, he would have a promising career, it would be a British-tainted career. If Gandhi succeeded, India would soon be rid of the British. Abhay had made his decision, and when graduation day arrived, the college authorities learned of his rejecting his diploma. In this way, Abhay registered his protest and signaled his response to Gandhi's call. So we can see Prabhupada had not yet understood that Gandhi was not actually following Krishna's teachings in Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada, still being a college student, he was still very much influenced by the nationalistic spirit, and he hoped that soon the British would be out of India and there would be a reawakening of the entire Vedic culture, including Vaishnavism, within India. And hoping for that time, he took a very courageous step, because his father, from childhood, was getting him very good education so that he could get a good career, so that he could be a gentleman within society. And now at the very last step, he rejected his diploma, which meant that how was he going to progress in his career? Gandhi's protest had increased its pitch in recent months. During the war, that's the Second World War, that was going on between the British and the Germans, Indians had remained loyal to the crown in hopes of generating British sympathy towards the cause of independence. This is the middle path, not the Subhash Chandra Bose and not the Gandhi. The middle path of the nationalists thought, let us cooperate with the British, and if we cooperate, then they will give us independence because they see that we're cooperating with them. It didn't work. But in 1919, England had passed the Rowlatt Act to repress the move for Indian freedom. The Rowlatt Act meant that anyone who they wanted to arrest, they could put into jail for 2 years. They didn't have to have any reason to arrest him. If they thought that someone was working against the British, they could throw the people in jail. So this caused a great uproar in India. Gandhi had then called on all Indians to observe a hartal, a day in which people all over the country had stayed home from work and school in protest. Although it had been a nonviolent protest, 1 week later in Amritsar, in the public square known as Jallianwala Bagh, British soldiers shot to death hundreds of unarmed, defenseless Indians who had gathered for a peaceful meeting. So this is where we begin to see that this satyagraha was not going to work. Because Gandhi had also, when he was in England, he had read the Bible. And he had read about Jesus Christ's teachings. That when someone hits you on the cheek, you turn the other cheek so they can hit you on that cheek too. His philosophy was that for every evil, you should return it with good. So Gandhi, he mixed the two together. He felt that the most important teaching in the Bhagavad Gita was satyam and ahimsa, and selfless service. He took the teachings of Gita and somehow, out of the Bhagavad Gita, he felt that in order to do selfless service, you had to be non-violent. Because if you were violent, then that was the whole lust, anger, greed, loss of memory, and then you fall down into delusion. He said, it is this violence that we have to avoid. So he started his satyagraha, his first hartal, after this Rowlatt Act. A week later, the British governor in Punjab, he decided he would not tolerate any type of rebellion, even if it was peaceful. So 1,200 people, 1,500 people were following Gandhi there at Jallianwala Bagh. They came for a peaceful they were just sitting. That's all. They weren't doing anything. And it was also Baishakhi. It was a holiday. But because of this Rowlatt Act, the governor, he surrounded all the people and brought hundreds of soldiers and started to just kill all the people for no reason whatsoever. So, Gandhi then lost all faith in the intentions of the empire towards India. Calling for complete non-cooperation, he ordered a boycott of everything British: commodities, schools, courts, military honors. And Abai, in refusing his degree, was moving to align himself more closely with Gandhi's independent movement. It was an outrage to the entire country what the British began doing at this point. So therefore, of course, Abai at this point was not going to side with the British anymore because they were using violence against his own people. So he rejected his BA and his graduation. But his heart was not in it. Just as he had never given his heart to college studies, to earning a degree, to his wife, so he was reserved about becoming a full-fledged nationalist. Abai had become inclined towards the cause, but never really convinced. Now, out of school, out of work, caring little for his career, education, or wife, he remained at home. He tried his hand at writing poetry for the occasion of a friend's wedding. He read Srimad Bhagavatam and the latest speeches of Gandhi. He had no immediate plans. So here Prabhupada is at what's going to happen next in his life. We'll hear next week. Hare Krishna. Jai. Thank you.